Hello, welcome back to my series on Russian subdivisions. Today I'll be covering Arkhangelsk Oblast. So, for our basics, it has a population of 1,155,000, putting it 53rd of the around 89 Russian subdivisions. However, in area, it is actually around 413,000 square kilometers, putting it 8th. When we include the Nenets Autonomous Okrug, which is this area, which is governed by the Oblast, but it's technically also independent, and I will be making its own video later in this series. So, for our capital and largest city, we have Arkhangelsk, which is around here on the White Sea, and it borders the Republic of Karelia here, Vologda Oblast, Kirov Oblast, Yamalo-Nenets Autonomous Okrug, the Kara Sea, the Barents Sea, the Petrora Sea, which is around here, and then the White Sea here, between the Kola Peninsula and kind of this inland area. It is around 77% urban and 23% rural, so basically on point with the Russian average for the urban to rural populations. So, for history. The region was colonized by the Novgorodian Republic around the 1200s, roughly. Kind of with traders and trappers, I tend to think too. Like, I don't think they were doing necessarily agricultural colonization, maybe more fishing and stuff like that. And it then kind of became a part of the Grand Duchy of Moscow and later Russia in 1478. And this area was basically kind of what I like to call a Siberia before Siberia, just due to its early integration within Russia, because a lot of old believers moved here during the mid to late 1600s before they actually just moved on to Siberia later. So that should give you kind of an idea of this place's isolation and being refuge for a lot of less welcome groups within Tsarist Russia, and also just the sheer kind of emptiness of a lot of it. I mean, it's so large, but there's so few people there, as we saw in that first slide. The establishment of St. Petersburg in 1703, I believe, meant Arkhangelsk lost basically all of its importance as this shipping port, because I mean, it was a lot easier to just move stuff to St. Petersburg. It would, freeze over less. Arkhangelsk was better than Murmansk, but it was still going to freeze over quite a lot. So basically, we have kind of a period of around 200 years where it's just this almost entirely irrelevant land until the early Civil War, the early part of the Civil War, where the Western intervention was based out of Arkhangelsk under General Poole, I believe, who was kind of leading the intervention through the north. It's actually quite an interesting story. I'm reading about it right now from a book called Nasty Little War, but it's quite interesting how a lot of the dynamics worked between the locals and then the military, because a lot of these locals were, like I said, kind of cut off from modern Russia for 200 years, without, not being a important region of Russia. And so you have, tanks, or not always tanks, but like armored cars and stuff like this coming in. And a lot of the people there were just like completely shocked at the sight of what modern war had come to. And then you also had a lot of towns kind of become sites of front lines within the oblast, and they were kind of arbitrary too. And so a lot of these townspeople just kind of got caught in between the Bolsheviks and the Western powers, I guess is probably the best way to put it. Either way, moving on, basically 3 years from the intervention and kind of reaching or starting in 1918 to when the Solovetsky Islands had the first gulag in 1921, which when at first I saw the Solovetsky Islands, I was like, I think I've heard that name before, and yep, it turns out they were first Gulag. And actually now I believe they are a World Heritage Site, so uh, kind of an interesting progression there, but I've seen some photos of them and they're absolutely beautiful, so I can't blame them for recognizing it. So Novaya Zemlya, which is in the far north of the oblast, it's its own set of islands. Completely barren, basically one of the northernmost points of Eurasia, but not the. We'll get to that later. It was used as a nuclear testing ground, which is probably the way you know about it. I believe the Tsar Bomba was tested there, and it still has a population, interestingly, but basically like all the original population there was kind of kicked out because it's Russia, and the Soviets basically didn't have any sort of moral code for evicting natives off their land. I mean, like many countries, but anyways, but at least we do have this cool flag from it where we know, or I know at least, there are now two Russian flags which have a bear and an atomic symbol on them. Because Novaya Zemlya has it, and then also Zheleznogorsk, which I have a flag of in my room. So that I don't know what to tell you, but do with that what you will. That Russia has two flags with this type of symbolism on it, but I'll probably have to get this flag in the future. It's pretty good. And then here we have a photo of the Western intervention. So for our geography, now we get to the northernmost part of Eurasia, which is Franz Josef Land, named after an Austrian, but part of Russia now, due to the Austrian Polar Expedition, I believe. And you can see kind of the geography of this land. It's just like kind of almost alien to, I think, most people, just because you have these like flat lands where it's like there's just water. It's like it's completely uninhabitable, I'm pretty sure, and it's just but I think it's almost like beautiful in a way, just kind of like how not different it is. So I think it's quite interesting. Maybe one day I'll go, I'll go there. I'd hope. But yes, this is basically the northernmost part of Eurasia, with only, I believe, in terms of the Earth, like Greenland and northern Canada is gonna be beating this in terms of northernmost points. It also has an important Russian military base, so it's also quite a strategic position too. There are some smaller mountain chains like the Timan and Pai Khoi ridges, but as you can see, they're ridges, so they're not very high, and most of the oblast is going to kind of look like this, so flatlands with maybe a few hills and some variation, but it's mostly just flat, kind of that northern European plain. And as you can see, we have a few rivers here, but probably the most important is the Northern Dvina, which was actually used during the intervention kind of as their base for where they were moving up and down. I mean, when the railways didn't work, and also just kind of as an idea for like how much progress they were making, they kind of measured it in the Dvina. Should also give you an idea of how far they got, that they basically only had to use one river, but either way, there are some smaller rivers like the Pechora, which gives the name to the Pechora Sea, and a few others which basically they just are kind of flowing out into the White Sea or Pechora or Barents Sea. And there are a lot of beautiful national parks. I believe there's like 6, which is quite a lot, I think, for a population so small. But I think there's a lot of tourism there. And I mean, it's quite a beautiful land. I mean, it's kind of like I'd imagine if you go to Alaska or Montana, like Glacier National Park or something like that, it might be similar. And then there are also a lot of swamps and wetlands, kind of somewhat like this, but a bit more. The water table is going to be a bit higher. which they're basically kind of, besides those few mountains, they're like kind of the only variation you're really gonna have within the geography of the oblast. In terms of people, the population has declined from about 500 to 600,000 since its peak at 1.6 million, I believe, in 1989. The oblast is 97.4% Russian, basically almost entirely Russian, and then there's some smaller Ukrainian and Belarusian, kind of those what you expect speaks like smaller populations with a lot of Russia. This is kind of a distribution that you can find within a lot of Russia, where it's like 95% Russian or something, and then there's Ukrainians, Tatars, Belarusians, Armenians, Azeris, stuff like that. But either way, let's get on to religion. So it's 29% Orthodox, 32.5% spiritual but not religious. Once again, quite a large portion of Russia's population is that. 16.4% atheist. And then, interestingly, there are also some Slavic pagans. This is the new version of the religion, not really going back too far. But I thought that was interesting, and you can see we have a symbol for it over here. I believe that's the symbol for the sun, or like the sun god. Sorry, I'm not too familiar with Slavic paganism, but it's somewhat interesting actually. Kind of how I think it's been revived, because it's like you're living on basically the same land where people practiced this like 1,000 years ago, and so it's kind of just like connecting back to that past, I think. So there are also around 1,200 Pomors in the region, out of a total population in Russia of around 2,200. And basically what they are is like a subset of Russians who are just kind of like considered the oldest inhabitants of this northern area along like the White Sea, the Barents Sea, and kind of they're descended from the Novgorodian colonists. It's kind of almost murky for exactly like how to define them, but they were kind of like this glimpse into the past of Russia, because their culture is almost frozen in time back then to a degree. Like of course a lot of them are modernized, but if you look at some of the photos of their towns from like 100 years ago, you could easily tell me like, oh yeah, that's a town in Russia from 1600 or 1500, and I'd probably believe you, just because of like how they held on to like a lot of these old religious rites and cultural practices. So overall, they're actually quite an interesting group. Little hard to define. They're also pretty small, but yeah, this is actually the hub for where they are, I guess, within Russia. So Arkhangelsk, officially established in 1584, but we'll have to go back a bit earlier to kind of understand this town. So originally, it's believed a monastery was established in the area around 1100, but I mean that it must have been a small community that was here, basically living on what was the fringe of the known world probably at the time. There just wasn't like a lot of exploration up there, I tend to think. But actually, we do kind of get to exploration next, when in the mid 1400s, I believe, some English sailors were trying to make the Northeastern Passage, which is the route over Russia, rather than the Northwestern Passage, which is over Canada. They were trying to, cross over Russia to trade with either Asia or North America. Well, it must have been Asia, because North America wasn't really discovered at the time by Europeans, but either way, they failed, and they were kind of forced to go to the area around Arkhangelsk. It has like a kind of a natural harbor, so I believe they stayed in there, and they actually established the Muscovy Company, which was basically the line of communications, from what I understand, between England and Russia for at least like 2 centuries if I had to wager, if not 3 or something, because I mean, it was a way that was a lot safer than, if you want to send an English envoy to Russia via Europe, you would have to cross the HRE, France, uh, whatever's going on in Eastern Europe. They're basically always war there, but Arkhangelsk was kind of the safe place for that sort of trade. And the Muscovy Company, I'd heard of it before, and it was kind of interesting. Now it's actually a charity, so that should give you an idea of how enduring this establishment has been. The city was, this was never actually achieved, but the northern end of the infamous AA line in World War II, which was basically part of the Operation Barbarossa plan, where they would reach from Arkhangelsk to Astrakhan in the south. It was never achieved. Moscow never fell, and so it kind of didn't never succeed. But this kind of highlights the placement of Arkhangelsk. It's like there's just really nothing around it in the north, so it's kind of like they couldn't really choose Murmansk because that's not much of an advance at that point. But like Arkhangelsk is far enough east, but also kind of like central enough to Western Russia that it was chosen for this line. The port of Arkhangelsk, which I mentioned with the harbor earlier, is actually still quite important both for shipbuilding, shipping, and also the Russian Northern Fleet, which has a base there. And the main airport is Talagi Airport, which is international, and it seems actually, not too bad for Russian airport standards. So there are a lot of services within the region for flight. If you think of like Alaska, where it has the highest amount of pilot licenses per capita, that's kind of similar to what's going on here in Arkhangelsk, because you really just can't drive around to the nearest town here. So, politics and economy. The current governor is Alexander Tsybulsky, who's from United Russia. He's currently sanctioned. I believe he was appointed by Putin, so once again, they were trying to consolidate their power within a lot of these regions. One of the largest industries here is lumber. It's been described that basically every single town has some sort of lumber industry there, so that should kind of give you an idea of how important it is to the economy, and also just like how widespread it is. And shipbuilding is also a large portion of the economy, with Sevmash in the capital, which I described that shipbuilding earlier. Agriculture is pretty rare. It's been tried, but it failed. Fishing also happens, but it's also still a lot weaker, since a lot of these subsidies ended with the USSR. And there's actually a specialization in beekeeping in some parts of the oblast, which, once again, always interesting to learn about those specialized local products within Russia. The Northern Railway connects Arkhangelsk to Moscow. It was, I believe, they tried to use it during the intervention in the Civil War, and it's kind of the main way for freight to travel in and out of the oblast within Russia. So I think the flag is quite good. It combines what is basically the Russian naval jack with this beautiful coat of arms. I think I'd probably buy it at some point, and I give it the A tier. The anthem is alright. It's just kind of boring. It's really not unique. It's just that it just doesn't really do it for me. But if you want to listen to it and disagree, just let me know, I guess. So, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video on Arkhangelsk Oblast. I'll be trying to do at least one more video before I go off on vacation. So, thanks again for watching.